loves. First and foremost, I apologize for the lighting and the setting. It's kind of all I gotta work with, and I'm kind of being pulled right now to talk about. I want to talk about the narcissist and the intimate relationship dynamic that happens and why somebody ends up kind of in the scenario and situation that they do. First and foremost, if you're watching this because you are currently in or coming out of such a relationship and want to try and like wrap your head around what the hell has happened, because you don't get it, props to you, because education is going to be your saving grace. If you are a loved one watching this because somebody you know is claiming to come out of such a dynamic or struggling with such a dynamic and relationship, props to you, because we need more people actually in this world that understand it. It's very hard to wrap your head around. It is not normal. And actually, when a victim or a survivor begins to speak their truth, they actually come out looking pretty crazy themselves. And that is the dynamic. That is why this thing is, these relationships are so traumatic. So this one is going to be based solely on the intimate love aspect. Is it really love? Let's talk about it. But let's dig in. For notation purposes, the sociopath and narcissist, I'm going to notate them as the predator or abuser, and the person that enters into the relationship as the victim or the survivor, depending on what part of the story. So how does this thing happen? Boy meets girl meets boy, or even boy meets boy, girl meets girl. It doesn't matter. Sexual orientation has nothing to do with it. And everything seems great. In fact, almost too good to be true. Well, there should be our first red flag, right? There's a cliche saying that anything that is too good to be true probably is. But forewarning, let's keep things legit. In any relationship, when we first meet, we always put our best foot forward, right? So we are already cognitively aware, to a certain degree, that is the case. Really quick, we have a grandiose, we have a covert. There's different other kind of narcissists or sociopaths. But to give quick classification, a grandiose is the person that kind of the narcissist that essentially owns their shit. They know who they are and take it or leave it. It's actually pretty sexy, especially if you are unfamiliar. I mean, it comes off pretty charismatic and charming, and let's give it due respect to a certain degree, that to know who you are and to own it is sexy. That is quite alluring. The truth is, though, on both sides of any narcissism, there's a lack of self-identity. They don't know who the hell they are. And you find that out down the road. With the covert, they are the shy, introverted ones, which actually, they will act more as the chameleon, meaning they will form to any identity necessary to win approval. And they are phenomenal con artists, to say the least. So that'll be your first red sign, if which is probably way past that at this point. But if you could have or are able to see how they juggle the different personalities between you and their friends or their family, you might be like, characters are not aligning. That'd be your first red flag. But if you're far past that, you can reflect back now. The difference being they present themselves differently. At the end of the day, they carry the same traits of narcissism. They are just displayed differently. So that's another video on itself. So everything seems great. And then you decide, hey, let's take this to the next level. Next level with any relationship is that bonding moment, and we call that the honeymoon stage. We are Twitter-pated. We spend a significant amount of time with the other person, and we begin to create bonds. We think the person that enters into a relationship of this dynamic think we are creating love bonds. There are bonds being created. However, it's not what it looks like. We are entering into also a stage of what's called the boiling frog. The frog is in boiling water as the water slowly increases, but we have no idea. It has no idea what the hell is happening to it. So let's talk about it. What happens in this bonding moment? Well, there is a significant amount of time spent with each other, and there's also a lot of significant moments of love and romance and charm and wedding and heart beating and that bond. But it's also the opportunity when the poison begins to sink in, because this is also where the predator begins to bring up reinforcements. What happens is we have intermittent reinforcements. This is also AKA the breadcrumbing. It's a mixed dynamic between the love and hate game. It's a roller coaster that really puts the neurochemistry in our brain into high wire, and we are really flabbergasted. I talk about this a little bit more let's talk about the next two. We have the power. The abuser has got to gain power over the victim. Now, in order to do so, what better way than through abuse? Now we have the apparent physical abuse that will definitely put us into like fear factor. The harder ones to distinguish the harder abuse to distinguish in intangible is the mental, the emotional, the spiritual abuse, the mind games that begin to take place. And then we also have the social influence factor, and let's give it due credit, guys. 90% of us, I'll give a rap. We really do. 90% of people care what other people think. It's actually a hindering factor and actually keeps us from doing everything else. So why the hell would it not play a part and an influence into this relationship? Because there's a lot of relationships that have a family, that have children, social influence and peer pressure of keeping a marriage together. I've heard a lot of that. Or else, another thing, speaking personally, you go to people trying to figure out what the hell is happening, especially in the beginning, and it's intangible. It doesn't seem to make sense. And some of these are so obscured, so subtle that you're doing a head spin. And when you go to talk to somebody, they're kind of looking at you like, well, yeah, every relationship has issues. You guys have a disagreement. Just work it out. So now you, the victim, kind of goes back and they're like, okay, I can work through this. First red flag I think I had, however, actually the first red flag was that the characters didn't have alignment, though I wasn't cognitively aware of that. It was like he presented himself to me in one fashion, but I saw him engage with his children or his parents or friends or whatever a little bit different. It was kind of interesting to watch that juggling, and I just remember thinking, why the hell do you do that? And then, so that was really a red flag. But the first one that came out directly towards me was, I remember him telling me that he felt annoyed with me. Now, this was very early on. This is where because I remember this specifically because I remember thinking and telling him, communicating with him, going, well, I feel like we are actually like that. I don't feel annoyed with you at all. I feel like I'm still on a honeymoon stage. I'm still Twitter hated by you, and I'm still like, like you frustrate me. And that frustration was because the character personalities didn't fully align. I was trying to be understanding, trying to wrap my head still around it. Still much in infatuation. But that was probably the first onset of direct association to intermittent reinforcements and the power establishment and obviously a brain manipulation. And when you go take that to somebody, they'll be like, well, like that seems subtle enough, right? Sure, your partner annoys you. That's what happens. But everybody's warranted to their feelings, and I took that in. What happens is that we continue this dynamic, and through that dynamic, we are creating bonds. Bonds are being created. And when we come through that honeymoon stage, the bond has been created. What kind of bond? Love bonding that most people encounter? Not in this dynamic. This dynamic, the trauma bond, or AKA Stockholm syndrome has taken place. The victim has now had the poison sink in. They've had a neurochemistry, which is a high and low roller coaster effect. And let's talk about that one for a minute. Not all bonds are created equally. Think about this for a second. When we talk about negative versus positive energies, so when a negative circumstance happens, our body goes on high alert, right? It is our body reaction to defend. We go into fight, flight, or freeze. That is the body human structure to protect itself. With the positive side, we're in serenity, we're calm, we're not on high alert. So what actually has happened through these negative things is there's chemicals that are released through this roller coaster of ups and downs, actually strengthening that bond, believe it or not, because they are so predominantly more enhanced than maybe the positive. And we're going to go into that dynamic now, because what has actually happened is there is the rewiring of the brain. There has been two main chemicals that are released that are linked to the trauma bond, to the Stockholm syndrome. Okay, so the dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter, and it's associated with the reward and motivation behavior. We also have the oxytocin, which has also been known as the love chemical, right? These two have been high alert with this roller coaster, and it has really intensified this bonding. This bonding is an addiction. It's not the actual love that one would associate it with. However, because normal relationships have their ups and downs, we think that this must be love. And because the addiction is now the poison essentially into you, you have become dependent on the abuser. When I say dependent, I'm not saying codependent. Those are two completely different things. You are literally dependent as any other person that has an addiction to their drug. So whether we're talking about drugs, we're talking about alcohol, we're talking about sex, we're talking about pornography, there is an addiction and you become dependent to get your kicks. So essentially, you're not going anywhere, and they know it. And the more they've got you hooked, the more they can treat you like shit. And this is when the abuse becomes worse, because you're not going anywhere, because you have there's an addiction. Now, I don't know that they cognitively are doing this because they know it, but also there is a statement: you set the standard for how people are going to treat you. So if you put up with it, they're going to keep on pushing it. Now, so whether they're cognitive or of the chemical thing, they are master manipulators, and there is an understanding to that. So at this point, if you can understand that it's not your fault, that's the biggest thing about this. It's not your fault. You've got to understand, I mean, it is science. We've put, normal people have been in these research, a part of this research, to see what happens to the chemistry of the brain, the neurochemistry, because this is a normal reaction. This is a normal brain. You are normal. That's what I want you to know. I want you to know you're normal. A normal brain reacts this way under abnormal circumstances of a roller coaster of high dopamine and oxytocin hormonal chemical release. The oxytocin being your hormonal release. This also explains why it's so hard to separate. The moment you try to separate, a new onset of things happen. And actually, every time you pull back and you come back, so you pull back and you come back because you have a relapse. Every time you have this relapse, the actual damage of the brain, of these neuroreceptors and the way that things are wired, actually gets worse. It's a proven fact. This being the bond, the trauma bond, the Stockholm syndrome, gets worse. And what many survivors and victims undergo is CPTSD, which is that of post-traumatic stress syndrome, but complex, meaning it's complex because you have been seduced to this traumatic, you have gone into survival for such long periods. It's not a one-time event. It's not like this horrific thing that happened. It's your brain has literally been wired to learn to survive day in and day out, and we're not creatures that are meant to do that. We are meant to have the gazelle, that's the example, right? The gazelle and the lion, high alert, and it's done, and you come down. Not in this relationship. You never know when that high and low is going to happen and what's going to hit. So that CPTSD actually worsens with every relapse. And I guarantee you, if you are a part of this dynamic, you will have a relapse. I'm sorry. It's just common. And even when you pull out, pulling away is probably going to be the hardest thing because you're going through that initial withdrawal. The cravings are intense. You believe everything. A part of this cognitive dissonance, which is a part of this bond. The bond comes out when the bond is created. You have the trauma bond and also cognitive dissonance, which means that as the abuse gets worse, we're smart. We still have everything functioning up here. The chemicals are just imbalanced, and the clarity, because of the cognitive dissonance, doesn't match those frequencies in our brain. That it doesn't make sense, but doesn't mean that we're stupid. We still fully understand. That's what makes it so hard, is that we know that we're being treated like shit, but we end up making excuses for them to appease the behavior, to appease our behavior for our addiction, for staying. We try to make it better. And also a huge factor to this is it's really important, especially when the predator gets a whiff of this, they'll use it as a manipulation tactic too. The twin flame and soulmate is a huge connector to the narcissistic sociopath dynamic relationship, because you guys have gone through so many ups and downs, because that neurochemical chemistry is so high wired, so high alert, so active within the mind, and that cognitive dissonance, that definitely, of all things, really is something to latch onto. The abuser can use it as a manipulation tactic, like, hey, we're twin flames, or we're twin or soulmates, or we're twin flames, and the victim, the survivor will actually, the victim will actually thrive onto that, because that is, even better. We are triggering one another. We are bettering one another. We're bringing out all the worst, so we can conquer the world. Let me tell you this really quick. Matt Kahn said it beautifully. If you don't know who he is, I suggest you go look him up, especially if you're an empath. I love his teachings. But he said it best. Anytime, any sort of abuse, whether that be physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, financial, you name it, anytime there is abuse, all soul contracts are voided. Your divine creator, the divine, did not ask you to come down here to make connection to another mate, to your twin flame, and endure any sort of fucking abuse to make you a better person. Hell no. That is huge. So let that one sink in. The divine loves you. Yes, you're here to learn lessons, but you're not here to learn it through manipulation and abuse, and that's anyway. So that's a big one, because people will play that one a lot. Oh, we're twin flames, we're just triggering one another, and there's a runner and whatever dynamic. No, I do believe people come into our roads to help. I even believe the narcissist comes, and the sociopath, this predator and abuser, comes into our path to help make us aware, and it definitely enhances our growth and our wisdom. we wouldn't get the growth without, I mean, this kind of growth without going through something, because it will literally change you forever. Now getting out, there is hope. But you have got to recognize that you are addicted. Every time you go back, it's going to make it worse. And that is going to be the battle. You are in a battle. It's not a battle for love. You are in a battle to save yourself. Because while you are addicted, they are abusing and belittling and degrading and smothering you out. And you are fighting for your soul. And that's really, like you're fighting for the essence of who you are. It's going to call upon every strength, like piece of strength you have. And you have got to recognize that you are literally, essentially in rehab. Reach out to the help, to get help that you need. Call upon strong family members that you can rely on and confide in, and beware, because they are the narcissist. The predator is really good, the abuser is really good at smear campaigns and the flying monkeys, making the recovery even harder. But you're not alone. It's very imperative that you keep your area as clean and narc free and sociopath free as you can. Make your living space as serene as possible. Be gentle with yourself. And above all else, like I hope that if anything this video can teach you or give you enlightenment, is it's not your fault. Normal people's brains function this way in this type of environment. That's why we are able to do the research and people are able to come forward. You're normal. You're normal, and it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. So quit beating yourself up. Because I know what it's like to be on the other end and to look at yourself in the mirror and belittle and degrade yourself, and that's not what you need right now. You've got to love yourself so damn much. You are finding yourself. You're remembering who you are. And you're able, you can do it. You can do it. I promise. It's going to be, it's a process, and it's hard. And that's really what this video is about. And I have so much love for you guys. I think this one's a huge one, because if we can understand the knowledge of what actually happens between, like, in our brain, and to recognize that it's not our fault, that we're not really weak. You're not weak. You're not this piece of shit that you're probably making yourself out to be, or the way you feel. Because I know how that feels. I've beaten myself up before too. And you gotta remember that you just gotta love yourself. Love. So much love to you, because you are worthy and you deserve it. And your body is trying to come back and fluctuate back to normal, and it is withdrawals. You're in withdrawals, and it hurts like a bitch. Please make comments, please subscribe, please share. I think more information, more things we can get out there, the better. I'm working to get a video out once a week. You're not alone. It's not your fault. Please reach out if you need help.